I appreciate always being once more in Rio de Janeiro, in IMPA, and I thank the organizers and Vladimir for the kind invitation. So I shall speak about an isentropic inviscid fluid, which therefore is governed. No, it doesn't. Is governed by the Euler equations, which consists in the conservation of mass and conservation of momentum. Rho is the mass density, U is the fluid velocity, P is the pressure, which is given as a function, an explicit function of the density. Here I shall choose the equation of state of an ideal gas, where the pressure is a power of the density. And the exponent gamma, which is a constant larger than 1, is called the adiabatic constant. Now, when we combine these equations, and if we are allowed to apply the chain rule, that is, if the flow is a classical one, a smooth flow, then the flow satisfies, in addition, the conservation of mechanical energy. Here is the mechanical energy, which is the sum of the kinetic energy and the internal energy. And the specific internal energy E, that is the energy per unit mass, is given by this formula when P is the power of the density. Of course, not all the flows are classical ones. After some finite time, usually shock develops, and then it is not anymore possible to derive this inequality, this identity. But then we ask for thermodynamical reasons that the flow satisfies a differential inequality instead. That is, instead of having equal 0 here, we will have less than or equal to 0 in the sense of distributions. I am interested in the Cauchy problem when the gas occupies a bounded region and is surrounded by vacuum at initial time. Then this will stay so forever. And at a given time t, the domain occupied by the gas, that is the domain where rho is strictly positive, is denoted omega of t. It is bounded, but it is an unknown of the problem. And therefore, we have to solve a free boundary initial value problem. The initial data concern the initial velocity, the initial density. We shall see that it is often easier to work with the sound speed c, that is the square root of dp d rho, instead of the density itself. Of course, equivalently, you can give the initial density or prescribe the initial sound speed. And at the boundary, which is a free boundary, we must match the vacuum. Now, at the boundary, we have to decide whether the flow is continuous, that is, the density and the velocity are continuous or not. So let's assume, for instance, that they are discontinuous. And let's write the Rankine-Hugoniot condition across the interface with the boundary. In the interior side, you have these quantities. This is for the conservation of mass. This is for the conservation of momentum. And on the exterior side of the interface, you have 0, just because the density vanishes outside and the pressure vanishes with the density outside. And now, because of these identities, you see that this term here will vanish. It is just this one multiplied by u. And there remains p of rho nu equals 0. Nu is the unit normal, so it is a non-zero vector. You obtain p equals 0, which amounts to saying that rho vanishes. So rho is actually continuous at the interface with a vacuum. And we shall retain this by saying that that boundary shocks are impossible with vacuum. Now, we don't know much about the Cauchy problem in several space dimensions for first-order systems of conservation laws, like the Euler system. What we do know, at least, is a theory for classical solutions, and this theory is local in time. It has been developed by many people, beginning with Lars Garding and Leray, and continuing with Kato, Friedrichs, Lax, Godunov, and Dafermos, and others. They are all based on some symmetrization of the system. So we say that a first-order system of conservation law is Friedrichs symmetrizable in the sense of Friedrichs if it can be written as a symmetric system. So here you have the first-order derivatives, and there you have matrices, and we ask that these matrices are symmetric. The first one, the one in front of the time derivative, being positive definite. And V is some choice of the unknowns. So you have to choose a convenient change of variable, change of unknown, V in terms of U. And the rule, the theorem, the classical theorem is that the Cauchy problem for a Friedrich symmetric system is locally well posed in some Sobolev space. Don't mind about ULOC. ULOC means uniformly, locally uniformly, or uniformly locally. You may think HS of RD if you prefer. Whenever the initial data takes values in a compact subset of the state domain, the domain where these matrices are defined, and smooth functions, you have local existence, local in time existence. Mind that there is a constraint on the exponent of a Sobolev space. The constraint is S larger than 1 plus half the space dimension, which means exactly that HS is included in C1. Since the solutions will belong to C0 in time with values in HS and C1 in time with values in HS minus 1, this means exactly that the solution is C1 in space and time. This is a classical solution. So let's see whether the Euler system is symmetrizable. Actually, there are always several ways to symmetrize a system, if there is one at least. And there might be a difficulty with the Euler system because the vacuum, the value ρ equals 0, plays the role of some singularity in the system. If you proceed, for instance, like Lax and Godunov did, starting from an entropy, a convex entropy of the system, and using dual variables, introducing dual variables, then you will end with a symmetrization of the Euler system, but this symmetrization will be singular at the vacuum, and you will not be able to use the theorem of local existence in the context where the gas is surrounded by vacuum. So you have to choose another symmetrization, a symmetrization which was found by Makino, Ukai, and Kawashima 30 years ago, which is written in terms of the fluid velocity and sound speed. Here, kappa is a constant defined as gamma minus 1 over 2. It is a positive constant. Then this is a symmetric system with the notations of the previous slide. S0 is this constant diagonal matrix, and the S alpha are the coefficients of Xi alpha in the symbol of this operator. So S of Xi, the symbol is U dot Xi times S0, which represents these convection terms. and this interacting matrix, which is symmetric too. Now, we can say that the Cauchy problem for the Euler system is locally well-posed, locally in time, well-posed in variables C and U. Not rho and U, but C and U. In the space HS with S larger than 1 plus D over 2. And this is valid even in presence of vacuum. This is very important in the context. Well, so this is just an application of the classical theorem. Okay? And these solutions are classical. They do not contain shocks. But they are defined only locally in time. The point is that after some finite time, the solution stops to be smooth and shocks begin to develop. What we can say also is something about the propagation of waves. And we can see, for instance, that the domain occupied by the gas grows at most linearly in time. Here, this is the ball of radius m in Rd, and m is this quantity. The solution is bounded, so this is a finite number. Well, we may ask ourselves whether such solutions can be globally smooth, globally in time smooth. Is it possible that T star, the time of existence of a smooth solution, be infinite? Let's begin with a positive result in this direction, which is about 20 years old. I begin with a preliminary step. Let me go back to the symmetrization that I had, this one. You can see that if C vanishes identically at initial time, then C will be 0 forever. Of course, this is not very interesting because C equals 0 means rho equals 0. It means that there is no gas. But let's be just mathematicians. If C equals 0 at initial time, then this equation disappears and there remains only du dt plus u gradient u equals 0. Okay? This is the one I have written there. And this is a vectorial Burgers equation, which we solve by means of a method of characteristics. It works exactly as the scalar Burgers equation. So you define dx dt, x are integral curves of the velocity. So dx dt equals u of x and t. The equation tells you that du dt equals 0 along characteristics. And when you differentiate with respect to space the equation, you obtain a Riccati equation along the characteristics for the Jacobian matrix gradient u. Now, this is an ordinary differential equation, which is very easy to solve, and you can see that this Riccati equation along one given characteristic has a global forward solution if and only if the matrix, the Jacobian matrix at initial time, does not have a non-positive real eigenvalue. It may have non-real eigenvalues. It may have positive real eigenvalues. So this is what is written there. Take U0 in HS with S larger than 1 plus D over 2. Then the classical solution of a vectorial Burgers equation exists for all positive time if and only if at initial time the Jacobian matrix at any given point, the spectrum of a Jacobian matrix is separated from the negative real axis. I think I should have written there the open negative real axis. Okay. Now, since we are interested with flows in which there is gas, so C is non-zero, we shall use a perturbation argument. We shall assume that the initial value, the initial data for the sound speed, C0, is small enough. And it has been proved by my student Magali Grassin in her doctoral thesis that if you make this assumption quantitative, that is, you ask that the spectrum of the Jacobian matrix is separated from the negative real axis, but uniformly in space, then there exists a small number delta, such that if C0 in HS norm, always the same HS, of course, is less than delta, then the classical solution exists for all positive time. So this is a global smooth solution. Now, on the other side, there is a negative result. Of course, in the previous theorem, I made a smallness assumption. So perhaps something will not work if my initial data is not small enough. So for this, I shall study the growth of the domain occupied by the gas. And to identify the domain, I consider its boundary, d omega. Of course, it is convected by the flow. So for a smooth solution, I define trajectories along the boundary, which are still integral curves of the velocity field. And now du dt, so du dt is the time derivative along the boundary, du dt. This is the time derivative plus u gradient u. And now, from the conservation of momentum, I obtain that this quantity equals minus c gradient c divided by the constant kappa. And because the solution is HS, c gradient c at the boundary vanishes because rho vanishes, and c is some power of rho. Therefore, we are still in the same situation as in the Burgers equation, where along the characteristics, du dt is 0. This means that these characteristics are straight lines. In other words, the flow coincides along the boundary with that of a free transport. So phi t is the flow, the real flow, the one of the gas, and psi t is the flow, is an artificial flow just defined by this formula, which means the free flow, in which you would have a material where particles do not interact with each other. And the important lemma here is the following one, that because of this coincidence, the volume, which I denote Q of t, of the domain occupied by the gas at time t, this volume is a polynomial function of degree less than or equal to d, the space dimension. So let me prove this result. It is an interesting story because when I discovered this fact, I told that to a few colleagues of mine who are eminent geometers. One of them, in particular, is costumate to come to to IMPA. His name is Etienne Gis. And he told me, oh, but Milnor had the same idea. He derived a cute proof of the Hairy-Ball theorem using this argument. So here is the proof. The volume of omega of t is the integral over, so omega of t is the image of omega 0 by the flow phi t. So this volume is the integral over omega 0 of the Jacobian of phi t. Well, this Jacobian, you can write it as the divergence of, so phi 1 is the first component, then you take the gradient of phi 2, you go up to the gradient of phi d, and here you have the exterior product. So this is a d minus 1 form, and you take the divergence, and you obtain a scalar. Now, the integral over omega 0 of the divergence is an integral over the boundary by the Green-Gauss theorem. So it is the integral of a normal trace of this vector field. Well, now phi 1t on the boundary equals psi 1t. So far, so good. Phi 2t equals psi 2t on the boundary. This does not mean that their gradients are equal because they coincide only on the boundary. So there might be a discrepancy between their gradients. But the discrepancy will be a normal component because they coincide on the tangential space. And if there is a difference between these two vectors, it will be a normal component. And when you take this product, because of the presence of a normal here, the difference will disappear. And therefore, all this quantity equals that one. And now you remark that this quantity is just a polynomial in T of degree less than or equal to D. And this is the proof. If we inspect the way this quantity depends on T, we can see that not only it is a polynomial of degree less than or equal to D, but its leading coefficient, J, is given by the integral of U01, gradient of U02, and so forth. This will be exactly the integral over omega 0 of the Jacobian of U0. So it is explicit in terms of the initial data. Now, the volume of omega of t, of course, is a non-negative quantity. So you have a polynomial which takes non-negative values over the interval 0 t star. So if you assume that t star is infinite, then necessarily the leading coefficient of this polynomial must be non-negative. So taking the contraposition of this remark, you obtain the following theorem that if this coefficient j, the integral of the Jacobian of U0 at initial time, if this coefficient is negative, then there is an obstruction, and T star has to be finite. So some singularity will develop in finite time. And if you inspect the proof, you will see that actually we did not use the fact that the flow is smooth in the interior of the domain, because we did not use the conservation of energy at all. What we used was only the fact that C gradient C vanishes at the boundary, and that's all. And therefore, this theorem tells you that the obstruction does not imply that shock develops. The obstruction tells you that some singularity has to develop at the boundary of the domain occupied by the gas. A much stronger consequence. let us investigate also the limit case where j equals 0, because this one is very interesting, actually. We obtain the following theorem that suppose that gamma is less than or equal to 1 plus 2 over d minus 1. For instance, in one space dimension, all gamma larger than 1 are admitted. In two space dimensions, gamma has to be less than or equal to 3. Then, if you have an admissible solution, by admissible I mean that the energy inequality is satisfied of the isentropic Euler system, and if you suppose that UC is smooth at the boundary, that is, C gradient C vanishes at the boundary. And finally, if you suppose that the constant J is less than or equal to 0, then the solution is only local in time. The difference between theorem 5 and 4 is that now the strict inequality has been replaced by a large one. So, of course, the case J strictly negative has been proved before. So there remains only the case J equals 0. Well, if J equals 0, then the polynomial Q, the volume of omega of t, is not of degree d. It is of degree less than or equal to d minus 1. Okay? Now, I establish an important lemma which tells you how the mass disperses as time increases. There are two cases, whether gamma is less than 1 plus 2 over d, or whether gamma is between these two thresholds. Okay, so if gamma is less than 1 plus 2 over d, then we find that the integral of rho to the gamma, that essentially the integral of the pressure, is bounded by a constant times a decaying function of time. Remember that kappa is gamma minus 1 over 2. In particular, if gamma equals the critical value 1 plus 2 over d, which is the value for monoatomic gas, you find that 2d kappa equals 1. So this is essentially constant over 1 plus t. And if gamma is slightly larger, then you control an integral, a time integral up to infinity of t dt times the integral of the pressure. And this integral will be finite. So the proof is based on a relation that I found more than 20 years ago, and which resembles some calculation that are well known in the study of nonlinear Schrödinger equation, actually. Here, you consider this integral, which looks messy, but it is not that much, because you can rewrite as a linear combination of the total mechanical energy, the inertia of the gas, and the momentum of inertia, integral of rho u dot x. And when you calculate the time derivative and you use the conservation of mass, momentum, and the energy inequality, then you can bound by above this time derivative by t times the integral of 2 rho e minus dp. D is the space dimension, and this is just this quantity. Okay. Now, let's consider, for instance, the second case. In the second case, 1 minus d kappa is negative, and therefore you can put this integral on left-hand side, it will be positive. You will integrate from 0 to plus infinity, and you will find that the integral of 2t times d kappa minus 1 times the integral of rho e dx is bounded by the initial value of this quantity. And the initial value of this quantity is just the initial inertia. And it gives you this result. If kappa is less than this threshold, then this coefficient is positive, and now you just apply a Grunwald inequality. Well, so far so good. Now let's go back to the proof of theorem 5. We consider the total mass of a gas. That is the integral of rho dx, which is a constant in time, of course. Let me first apply the Hölder inequality. So I can bound the integral of rho by the volume of omega, that is the integral of 1, up to the exponent 1 minus 1 over gamma, times the integral of rho to the gamma to the exponent 1 over gamma. Now, the volume, let me remind you that I assumed j equals 0, that is, the degree of q is less than or equal to d minus 1. So the volume is bounded by 1 plus t to the d minus 1 up to a constant. And now this exponent is that one. Well, now I use the dispersion. And the dispersion tells me that this integral of rho gamma decays as 1 plus t to some negative power. The negative power is minus 2d kappa. I am here in the first case. Okay? So I have 1 plus t to some complicated exponent. But there are cancellations. And you find that this exponent is 1 over gamma minus 1. And it is strictly negative because gamma is larger than 1. And this tells us that m tends to 0 as time goes to plus infinity. And here is the contradiction because m is a constant in time. So this proves the case j equals 0. And this proof is important in the following result. I had been interested for more than 20 years in the case of eternal smooth flows. What is an eternal flow? An eternal flow is a solution. Okay, let's consider a dynamical system, any kind of dynamical system. An eternal flow, an eternal solution, is a solution which is defined for all real values of the time. But not only for positive values or values larger than some t0, but for all values from minus to plus infinity. Of course, among eternal solutions, you have steady, periodic, homoclinic, heteroclinic solutions. You may have traveling wave solutions on solitons. If your dynamical system is a PDE or a system of PDE, you may have multi-solitons. You may have interacting fronts in reaction diffusion equations, interacting viscous shock fronts. Global Maxwellians have been found by David Livermore 2 years ago for the Boltzmann equation. And when you average them, you find also eternal isothermal flows with Gaussian density. So there are plenty of examples of eternal solutions to dynamical systems. And our question is it possible to find eternal solutions of the isentropic Euler equations that are compactly supported in space, that is, where the gas is surrounded by the vacuum? And here we have a very interesting dichotomy, which I anticipated 20 years ago, but I proved the dichotomy only last year. I knew that if the space dimension is even, say in 2 space dimensions, but also in 4 space dimensions, if you believe to fluids in 4 space dimensions. Okay. We may choose the initial velocity in such a way that its Jacobian matrix never have a real eigenvalue. It is possible because the Jacobian matrix is a D by D matrix. If D is even, it is possible to choose this matrix so that it does not have a real eigenvalue. Of course, you make this assumption quantitative, uniform in X, and then you apply the global existence result that we had forward, and now it will work both forward and backward because the Euler system is reversible, and you find that if the initial data is small enough in the HS norm, then you obtain an eternal smooth solution. And an example of such a velocity field is when you take X and you rotate it by 90 degrees in 2 space dimensions. Now, when D is odd, I knew that at least when D equals 1, such an eternal solution does not exist just because you can use the lax calculation along the characteristics and find that shocks must develop either at some positive time or at some negative time. But of course, the method of characteristic is not available in several space dimensions. So it lasted 20 years before I found the following proof that there does not exist any such eternal solutions when the space dimension is odd. So here is the proof. Consider again the volume Q of T, of the domain occupied by the fluid. We have seen that it is a polynomial of degree less than or equal to D. Now, if the solution is eternal, this means that this polynomial takes non-negative values, at least actually positive values, for every time. So for every value of T, from minus infinity to plus infinity. But a non-negative valued polynomial must be of even degree. And if D is odd, this implies that not only the degree of Q is less than or equal to D, but actually it has to be less than or equal to D minus 1. And then the proof is exactly as before. You use dispersion, you let T go to plus infinity, and you find that the mass is 0. Here is the contradiction. Now, all these results about solutions that are smooth at the boundary show that, in general, in finite time, some singularity must develop at the boundary. And the singularity must be such that the term C gradient C is non-zero at the boundary. And this is what Taiping Liu called a physical singularity. C gradient C must not vanish, not always vanish at the boundary, essentially because the volume omega of T has to grow at least like T to the D to cope with the dispersion estimate and the conservation of mass. So let us go back to the calculation of the characteristics that are at the boundary. They are still integral curves of the velocity field. And now the acceleration du dt is ut plus u gradient u. It is this quantity. And this quantity has the possibility to be non-zero. So we have an acceleration of a boundary, which I call g, this quantity. Here it is a scalar, so this is just the normal component of a gradient, so the normal derivative. Because of the fact that C vanishes outside, C vanishes at the boundary and is positive in the interior, the normal derivative will be non-negative. And with the minus sign in front, we see that G must be non-positive. The derivative will be non-positive, and with the minus sign, the acceleration will be non-negative. So this is genuinely an acceleration. It is not a deceleration. Okay? Local existence of shock-free solutions in the interior, but with physical singularities at the boundary has been established by these people. So first in one space dimension and then in two space dimension. These are extremely complicated proofs because the system degenerates a lot. Now nobody has been able to get rid of the degeneracy at the boundary. So these theorems use intensively the Nash-Moser techniques. Now, I don't know if I have still how many minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. So I shall describe a little bit what is happening in the one-dimensional case when now our solutions may have a physical singularity at the boundary. That is, the sound speed may be Hölder of exponent 1/2 and not better. So in one space dimension, the domain is an interval between A of t and B of t. And because the boundary is accelerated, we find that B is convex because, well, we have seen d2b dt square is non-negative, and A is concave, okay, on the other side. And in the interior, of course, we ask that rho u or Cu is an entropy solution of the Euler system. I told you that there are no boundary shocks, so the density vanishes at the boundary. That is, at almost every point of the boundary of the space-time domain occupied by the gas, rho, the limit of rho is 0. And now there is a crucial observation about characteristic curves. We have two families of characteristic curves, those going faster than the fluid and those going slower than the fluid. So the two characteristics and the one characteristics. And we find that the two characteristics, there is a picture after, the two characteristics may emanate from the right boundary and it may terminate at the it may emanate from the left boundary and may terminate at the right boundary, but the converse is not possible. And if you are interested in one characteristics, you just switch everything because of the symmetry of the system in X. So the picture represents the space-time. Space axis is horizontal, the time axis is vertical. At a given time, the slice here is the domain occupied by the fluid. So the space-time domain occupied by the fluid is as the shape of a hyperbola. Okay, its boundary as a shape of hyperbola. What is important here is if you consider the tangent curves of a boundary, of a space-time boundary, each tangent curve is a characteristic. But actually, it is made of one characteristic, the forward part of the characteristic curve here, and of the two characteristics, the backward part. And if you take a tangent to the left side, to the left part of a space-time boundary, then the 1 is replaced by a 2, and the 2 is replaced by a 1. Okay? You can verify that at every point you have exactly 2 characteristics, and the 1 characteristic goes to the left, and the 2 characteristic goes to the right. Okay? The white part is the vacuum, of course. In this situation, I have a scattering result, which goes as follows. So let me consider an eternal flow. I told you a few minutes ago that in one space dimension there does not exist an eternal flow. But this non-existence concerned eternal flows that are smooth up to the boundary. Here, the flows admit physical singularities at the boundary. And there exist, in that case, some examples with eternal flows. I shall give you an explicit example in the next slide. Now, because of the convexity of B, of the function B, because of the convexity of this curve, we have a limit slope at infinity, at plus infinity, which I denote Q plus, and a limit slope at minus infinity, which I denote Q minus. And the same thing on the left part, I have a limit slope at minus infinity, which I call P minus, and a limit slope at plus infinity called P plus. And the theorem is that if the flow is shock-free in the interior of the domain and has physical singularity at the front, then P plus equals Q minus and P minus equals Q plus. So the tangent at infinity here and the tangent at infinity there are parallel to each other. And same thing for the two other ones. And this is an explicit example for which I choose gamma equals 3, which is the monoatomic case in space dimension 1. Here we can perform explicit calculations because the system, for this particular value of gamma, the system splits into two independent Burgers equations. They are not completely independent because if you have shocks, they are coupled through the Rankine-Hugoniot relations. And if you have physical singularity at the vacuum boundary, then you have also a coupling. So in this situation, I can provide the following explicit solution in which the domain occupied by the fluid, the space-time domain, is exactly bounded by a hyperbola. X squared equals 1 plus t squared. Actually, I can construct much more exact solutions because I am free in this situation. I am free to choose any convex function B, any convex function A, and such that their slopes agree. And then I can reconstruct an eternal flow which admit these functions as the graph of these functions as the boundary of the domain occupied by the gas. Well, and the last theorem, still for the monoatomic gas in space dimension 1, answers the following question. Given an initial data, U0 and C0, compactly supported in C0, of course, what is the condition, a necessary and sufficient condition, in such a way that the solution, smooth in the interior and with a physical singularity at the boundary, is eternal? And the answer is that it is necessary and sufficient that the Riemann invariant U0 plus C0, you see it is one of the quantity obeying a Burgers equation. This Riemann invariant be concave, and the other one, S0, where only the sign here is changed, be convex. And when these functions are concave and convex respectively, you can, their graphs enclose some bounded domain in the UC plane. In the XR or XS plane. The graph of R is the upper part. I shall make a picture. So I have an X here, some variable there, and here I have a convex domain. This is V equals R0 of X, and this is V equals S0 of X. Okay? So the graphs enclose a convex domain of which I choose an equation F negative. And then the solution of the flow of a gas will be eternal and shock-free, and it is given implicitly by this equation. Well, thank you for your attention.